In Rodric Vane's empire, the deadliest weapons weren't the guns hidden beneath his capos jackets. They were the 6 ounces of ink, paper, and altered shadows sitting directly on his desk, waiting to dismantle a kingdom. Morgana had spent 4 years building the perfect trap, calculating down to the milligram how much a stolen empire weighed. She just didn't realize the quiet girl pouring the espresso had been weighing her mistakes for months. If you're a fan of thrilling stories filled with suspense, mystery, and unexpected twists, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. With that said, let's dive into today's story. The top-floor penthouse of the Obsidian Tower did not feel like a place where laws were made. It felt like a place where they came to die. Outside, a relentless summer storm lashed against the reinforced glass windows, turning the city skyline into a blurry collage of neon blues and smears of yellow light. Inside, the room smelled of heavy things. Aged mahogany wood polished to a mirror shine, the sharp smoke of imported Cuban tobacco, and the faint, cold scent of gun oil. Rodric Vane sat perfectly still in his high-backed leather chair. At 38 years old, he did not look like a traditional mob boss. He did not wear heavy gold chains or loud tracksuits. He wore a custom-tailored, triple black Italian suit that fit his lean, athletic frame like armor. His dark hair was combed back precisely, and his sharp jawline was set in stone. For nearly a decade, Rodric had ruled the city's underground with absolute discipline. He didn't rule through loud threats. He ruled through perfect organization and an icy intelligence that kept him 3 steps ahead of both the police and his rivals. Yet, tonight, a small crack had formed in his perfect world. 3 hours ago, a highly encrypted message had bypassed his primary firewall and landed on his private laptop. It contained only 2 sentences. Asterisk, the nest has a viper. Tonight's financial audit is a trap. Asterisk. Rodric didn't panic. Panic was for dead men. Instead, he sat in the quiet dark of his office, letting the storm rage outside while he waited for his inner circle to arrive. A soft, polite knock broke the silence of the room. The door clicked open, and Sonita entered. She walked with a quiet, fluid grace, her eyes lowered respectfully toward the floor. She wore the standard black and white dress uniform of the penthouse's private cleaning staff, complete with a crisp white apron and a small lace headpiece. In her hands, she carried a heavy silver tray holding a fresh porcelain pot of espresso and a single cup. To anyone else in the Vane crime family, Sonita was invisible. She was simply the quiet, 26-year-old woman hired 6 months ago to dust the shelves, polish the silver, and make sure the boss's private quarters remained immaculate. She never spoke unless spoken to. She never looked anyone in the eye. "Your evening espresso, Mr. Vane," Sonita said, her voice soft, smooth, and entirely calm. She walked over to the massive mahogany desk, careful to place the silver tray on the far left edge, well away from the center of the desk where important documents usually rested. Rodric didn't look up from his hands, which were loosely folded over his stomach. "Leave it." Instead of turning around and walking out immediately as she usually did, Sonita lingered. She stood beside his chair for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Her eyes lifted slightly, shifting from the floor to Rodric's neck. "Forgive me, sir," Sonita murmured, stepping a single inch closer. Her voice remained completely level. "Your top shirt button has come undone, and your silk tie is slightly askew. The regional capos and the elder will be stepping out of the elevator in less than 15 minutes. You want to look completely flawless before you face them." Rodric remained perfectly still. He was a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was, yet he allowed this seemingly harmless maid to step into his personal space. He didn't flinch. "Fix it." Sonita set her empty hands flat for a brief moment, then raised them with practiced ease. Her fingers were cool and incredibly steady as they brushed against the collar of his black dress shirt. She deftly caught the loose silver button, sliding it smoothly into its slit. Then, with 2 quick fingers, she adjusted the heavy silk knot of his black tie, pulling it tight against his throat until it was perfectly centered. But as she smoothed down the fabric of his collar, her right thumb pressed firmly against the side of his neck. It wasn't the clumsy, accidental touch of a nervous maid. It was a firm, deliberate pressure applied directly over his carotid artery. She held it there for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to measure his resting heart rate, long enough to communicate that she knew exactly how calm he was. As she leaned in close to finalize the knot, her head passed right by his ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper so low, so quiet, that it was completely buried beneath the deep hum of the building's air conditioning system. "Watch your right hand, Mr. Vane," Sonita whispered into his ear. "The shadow on your desk isn't where it belongs." Before Rodric could even narrow his eyes or ask a question, Sonita instantly broke contact. She stepped back 2 full paces, lowered her head again into her submissive posture, and picked up her silver tray. "Have a productive meeting, sir," she said clearly. She turned and slipped out through the side door that led to the kitchen quarters, disappearing as silently as a ghost. Rodric sat alone for a moment, letting the warmth of her breath fade from his ear. Watch your right hand. The shadow isn't where it belongs. He didn't move his body, but his eyes instantly flicked to the right side of his massive mahogany desk. Right now it was empty. Before he could process the riddle any further, the heavy double doors at the front of the office swung open. Morgana walked into the room. Morgana was the absolute definition of corporate power and efficiency. At 34, she was Rodric's chief executive assistant, his brilliant financial strategist, and his closest confidant for the past 4 years. She wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal gray pantsuit. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a flawless, tight ponytail that didn't have a single strand out of place. She walked with long, confident strides, carrying a thick, legal-sized manila folder secured by a heavy steel clip. If Rodric was the muscle and the iron will of the Vane Empire, Morgana was the brain that kept the gears turning. She managed the shell companies in Panama. She routed the money through Swiss banks. She knew every dirty secret, every hidden asset, and every bribe paid to city officials. "The elevator just clear the lobby," Morgana said, her voice crisp, loud, and authoritative. She didn't look like someone who worked for a criminal. She looked like someone who could run a Fortune 500 company. Lorenzo, Marcello, and the Elder have passed through the biometric security scanners downstairs. They're on their way up for the midnight audit. Rodric watched her face, searching for any sign of fear, hesitation, or deceit. "And the primary ledger? Is it complete?" "Right here," Morgana said smoothly. She stepped up to the desk, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. With a practiced, graceful motion, she laid the thick manila folder down on the right side of his desk. "I personally spent the last 6 hours cross-referencing our shipping port revenues with the offshore distributions. Every single dollar matches perfectly. One glance at these sheets, and the Elder will have absolutely no choice but to sign off on your expansion into the eastern docks. Your victory tonight will be total." Rodric looked down at the folder. Then, he looked at the polished wood of his desk. The heavy desk lamp on his left side cast a long, bright light across the surface. Because of the angle of the light, the thick folder threw a sharp, dark shadow across the right side of the desk. Rodric's eyes locked onto that shadow. The folder was sitting slightly crooked. It was overlapping a very faint, circular water ring left by a glass of ice water he had drank 6 hours ago. Rodric remembered exactly where that water ring was because he had watched Morgana wipe the desk clean before she left for the archive room earlier that afternoon. But more importantly, Rodric noticed the shadow itself. The edge of the shadow was slightly blurred, as if the folder wasn't resting completely flat against the wood. There was a tiny, microscopic lift in the center of the folder's cardboard backing, a raise of perhaps 2 millimeters. "The shadow isn't where it belongs." Rodric looked up from the desk, his dark eyes slowly rising to meet Morgana's gaze. She was standing tall, her arms folded neatly in front of her waist. She looked perfectly calm, but Rodric's trained eyes began to pick apart the details. There was a tiny, almost invisible bead of sweat right at the edge of her hairline near her left temple. Her fingers, which usually rested loosely when she was confident, were locked together so tightly that her knuckles were turning white. "Tell me, Morgana," Rodric said, his voice dropping into a low, conversational tone that carried a hidden edge of danger. "Did anyone enter the secure archive room while you were compiling these numbers?" "Absolutely not, sir," Morgana replied instantly, her voice steady and without a single tremor. "I kept the biometric deadbolt engaged the entire time. I haven't let this folder out of my sight for even a second. You know how I operate. Security is my highest priority." Rodric let a slow, cold smile creep across his lips. It was an expression that contained no warmth, an expression that usually signaled someone was about to die. "Excellent," Rodric murmured, leaning back into his leather chair. "You've always been incredibly reliable, Morgana. Let them in." The heavy double doors opened wide, and 3 men stepped into the office, flanked by 4 heavily armed bodyguards who took up positions by the entrance. The 3 men were the pillars of the city's criminal commission. On the left was Lorenzo, 32 years old, hot-headed, covered in expensive tattoos, and wearing a flashy velvet jacket. He was reckless, loud, and hungry for more power. He ran the gambling dens and the street distribution, and he had spent the last year complaining that Rodric was keeping too much of the profit for himself. On the right was Marcelo, 55 years old, a seasoned killer whose face was lined with deep scars from old turf wars. He wore a simple, dark wool overcoat. He didn't speak much, but his hand never drifted far from the inside pocket of his coat, where a silenced pistol rested. He was a man of the old school. He respected strength, but he respected survival more. In the center of the trio walked the Elder. The Elder was nearly 80 years old. His body was frail, his skin looked like wrinkled parchment paper, and he walked slowly with the help of a heavy, silver-headed cane. But no one in the city dared to look him in the eye. The Elder had survived 5 different Mafia wars by being the most ruthless, calculating human being alive. He controlled the high-ranking judges, the politicians, and the police chiefs. If the Elder decided you were done, you simply disappeared from the face of the earth before sunrise. The 3 men walked over to the long mahogany conference table that stood in the center of the office, directly opposite Rodric's desk. The bodyguards stayed by the door, their hands resting on their submachine guns. "Rodric," the Elder said, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping across a gravel road. He took his seat at the head of the table, leaning his chin heavily on his cane. "We are here because the streets are becoming loud. There are whispers flying through the commission. Whispers that the money from the eastern shipping yards is bleeding. Lorenzo claims you are hiding the real numbers from us. Marcelo worries that your operations are drawing too much attention from the federal investigators." Lorenzo leaned forward, slamming his hand flat against the table. "I don't just claim it, Elder. I know it. Look at his lifestyle. Look at this tower. Rodric is keeping the cream for himself and leaving us the scraps. We want to see the complete, unedited ledger tonight. If the numbers don't match our bank accounts, the alliance is over." Rodric didn't move an inch. He didn't blink at Lorenzo's outburst. He simply sat in his chair, looking at the 3 men as if they were children throwing a tantrum. "The alliance is exactly as strong as it has always been," Rodric said smoothly. He nodded slightly toward his desk. "The truth is sitting right there. Morgana has spent the entire day preparing the final audit. Every dollar is accounted for. Every shipment is logged." Morgana stepped forward immediately, her heels clicking on the floor. She walked toward the desk, her face a mask of absolute professional confidence. She reached out her right hand, her fingers extending toward the manila folder, preparing to pick it up and present it to the Elder. "Stop," Rodric said. The word was quiet, but it filled the room like a sudden clap of thunder. Morgana's hand froze exactly 1 inch above the manila folder. Her fingers trembled for a microsecond before she pulled them back, tucking her arms behind her back. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vane?" Morgana asked, her voice slightly tight. "Before we open the books and look at the numbers," Rodric said, his eyes locked entirely on Morgana's face, "I want to ensure our digital security is completely locked down. Morgana, leave the folder on the desk. Go down to the outer office and fetch the secondary encryption keys from the wall safe. We will verify the digital signatures alongside the hard copy. Morgana's eyes widened slightly. A sudden flash of pure, unadulterated panic swept across her features before she quickly forced her professional smile back onto her face. "Of course, Mr. Vane. Right away. I'll be back in 2 minutes." She turned and walked quickly toward the main doors, her movements slightly faster, slightly more frantic than before. The moment the double doors clicked shut behind Morgana, Rodric stood up from his leather chair. He didn't look at the folder. Instead, he walked over to the small side door that led to the kitchen and service quarters. He opened the door and gestured into the dimly lit hallway. "Come in." A figure stepped out of the shadows of the hallway and entered the bright light of the main office. It was Sonita, but she was no longer the quiet, invisible maid who kept her head down. She had taken off her white apron and her lace headpiece, throwing them onto a nearby chair. Her posture was completely transformed. She stood tall, her shoulders back, her gaze sharp and piercing as she looked at the powerful criminal leaders sitting around the table. There was an unmistakable aura of lethal authority radiating from her. Lorenzo instantly stood up, his hand reaching into his velvet jacket for his gun. "What the hell is this, Rodric? Why are you bringing the cleaning lady into a high-level commission meeting? Have you lost your mind?" "Sit down, Lorenzo," Rodric commanded, his voice cold enough to freeze water. "If she wanted you dead, you wouldn't have felt the bullet." Marcelo didn't draw his weapon, but his eyes narrowed to slits as he watched Sonita walk straight toward the mahogany desk. "She doesn't walk like a maid. She walks like a soldier." "She is a soldier," Rodric said. He looked at Sonita. "Explain the shadow." Sonita walked up to the right side of the desk. She didn't touch the folder. Instead, she leaned down, pointing a single, slim finger at the bright red wax seal that closed the edge of the manila folder. "Look at the wax," Sonita said, her voice loud, clear, and completely devoid of her previous shy accent. "The Vane crime family uses a very specific stamp for internal security documents, a counterfeit mark designed to look like Mr. Vane's old family ring. This folder has a real wax stamp made from the actual original ring. But Mr. Vane hasn't used his original ring in 3 weeks. It has been locked in the primary basement vault." The elder leaned forward, his interest caught. "Go on, girl." **** Morgana *** stole the original ring from the vault 3 days ago, made a perfect silicone mold of it, and returned it before anyone noticed, Sonita explained smoothly. She used the duplicate ring to create this fake seal, thinking it would make the folder look more authentic. But that was her first mistake. Sonita then pointed to the microscopic lift in the center of the folder's cardboard backing, the tiny gap that Rodric had noticed earlier. "The second mistake is the physical weight," Sonita continued, looking around the table at the capos. "A standard financial ledger consisting of exactly 90 pages of heavy bond paper weighs exactly 14 ounces. I have handled thousands of documents in my career. When Morgana brought this folder up from the archive room, I watched the way her wrist moved. The folder was heavier. It weighs closer to 20 ounces. Why would a file be heavier?" Marcelo asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Because the cardboard backing has been split open, hollowed out, and resealed," Sonita said, a cold smile appearing on her face. "Inside the binding of that folder, there's a localized digital broadcasting unit. The very moment Mr. Vane breaks that red wax seal and opens the folder, the device will activate. It will instantly transmit the complete digital routing numbers of every single one of your offshore bank accounts directly to an external server. By tomorrow morning, the FBI will freeze every asset you own, and a federal SWAT team will be breaking down your doors." Lorenzo's face turned bright red with anger. "That bitch. She's wired the office." "Who are you?" the elder asked, his sharp eyes fixing onto Sonita. "You are no simple house cleaner." "My name is Sonita," she said, looking the elder dead in the eye. "Formerly of Department 7, the government's elite counter-espionage unit. I left the agency 2 years ago to work in the private sector. Mr. Vane hired me 6 months ago under a highly classified contract. His instructions were simple: pretend to be a maid, watch every member of his staff, and find the high-level mole who was leaking information to the federal authorities. She turned her gaze back to the door, and tonight, the mole finally took the bait. Suddenly, without any warning, a loud, mechanical click echoed through the walls of the penthouse. The bright overhead lights flickered twice, buzzed violently, and then died completely. The entire office was instantly plunged into pitch-black darkness. "Nobody move," Marcello shouted in the dark, the sound of his leather coat rustling as he finally drew his silenced pistol. "Get the guards," Lorenzo screamed, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor as he scrambled backward. A split second later, the sharp, deafening crack of a high-powered rifle shattered the silence. The massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city took two heavy impacts. The heavy armored glass didn't shatter into pieces, but it spider-webbed violently, creating huge white bursts of cracked glass that blocked the faint light from the city outside. The sniper shots had come from the roof of the adjacent building across the street. Rodric dropped to one knee instantly, his hand moving like a lightning bolt to draw his customized silver .45 pistol from his waistband. He didn't fire. He listened. In the absolute darkness, his highly trained eyes picked up a very specific sound from the far side of the office. The distinct metallic click of the private emergency exit door opening. The door that led straight to the roof's helipad. Morgana, Rodric growled into the dark. "I'm already on her." Sonita's voice cut through the darkness, completely calm, steady, and devoid of any fear. A loud mechanical hum groaned through the building as the emergency backup generator kicked in. The main overhead lights stayed off, but the low-voltage emergency lights along the baseboards flickered to life, bathing the entire office in a bloody, deep red glow. Rodric stood up quickly, his eyes scanning the room in the crimson light. The right side of his desk was completely empty. The manila folder was gone. Morgana was gone. The side door to the helipad stairs was swinging shut on its hinges. Rodric turned to Marcello and Lorenzo, who were standing near the conference table with their guns drawn, their faces pale in the red light. "Secure the main elevators. Tell your bodyguards to lock down the entire building from the lobby to the garage. If Morgana manages to reach the street level, I will hold both of you personally responsible." Without waiting for their reply, Rodric turned and sprinted toward the private exit door, with Sonita running right beside him. The private staircase was a narrow, cold concrete shaft that spiraled up 2 floors directly onto the roof of the Obsidian Tower. The red emergency lights inside the stairwell cast long, dancing shadows against the walls as Rodric and Sonita took the stairs 3 at a time. Above them, they could hear the heavy, frantic echoing of Morgana's high heels slamming against the concrete steps. She was running for her life, but she was carrying the heavy folder, which slowed her down. "She has an escape plan," Sonita said as they raced up the stairs, her breathing perfectly controlled despite the intense physical exertion. She didn't just turn off the lights. She had a team cut the main power lines in the basement. The sniper across the street was a distraction to keep your capos from following her. "She won't make it off the roof," Rodric said, his face a mask of pure fury. "The airspace over this tower is restricted. It's not restricted for a black market helicopter with cloned transponder codes," Sonita replied sharply. They reached the final landing. The heavy steel door leading to the roof was wide open, swinging violently in the powerful wind. The sound of the storm outside was deafening now, mixed with a deep, rhythmic thumping noise that made the concrete structure vibrate beneath their feet. The helicopter was already there. When Rodric and Sonita burst through the heavy steel door onto the wide, wet expanse of the roof, the full force of the summer storm hit them like a wall. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, blinding their vision, and the cold wind whipped their clothes around their bodies. In the center of the concrete pad, a sleek, twin-engine black helicopter was idling. Its massive main rotors were spinning at high speed, slicing through the heavy rain clouds and creating a fierce downdraft that blew water across the roof like a wave. Morgana stood just 3 feet away from the helicopter's open sliding door. She was drenched, her perfect ponytail ruined by the wind, her gray pantsuit soaked through. In her arms, she clutched the thick manila folder tightly against her chest, as if it were a newborn child. Standing in front of her, forming a defensive wall, were three heavily armed mercenary guards. They wore unmarked black tactical gear, night vision goggles, and held short-barreled automatic rifles aimed directly at the roof entrance. Asterisk, asterisk, Morgana, asterisk, asterisk. Rodric roared, stepping out onto the wet concrete, his silver .45 pistol raised and locked on her position. His voice easily carried over the deafening roar of the helicopter engines. There is absolutely nowhere you can fly where my shadow won't find you. Drop the folder and step away from the chopper. Morgana looked back over her shoulder, her face twisted into a wild, frantic mixture of deep hatred and absolute triumph. She didn't look like the polite, quiet assistant anymore. She looked like a woman who believed she had finally won. "It's over, Rodric," Morgana screamed back through the wind, her voice shrill and angry. "I have given you 4 years of my life. 4 years of cleaning up your bloodstains, managing your ghosts, hiding your money, and building this entire damn kingdom from nothing while you treated me like a glorified secretary. You never respected me. You just thought I was a tool." She held the folder higher, pressing it against her chest. "The Maroney crime family offered me $50 million for the complete routing codes of your entire offshore banking network. It's all in here. The moment I get into this helicopter, your empire belongs to them, and you are just a dead man walking." "You made one fatal mistake, Morgana," Sonita said, stepping out from behind Rodric. She walked out into the open rain with slow, calm steps, completely unbothered by the 3 automatic rifles aimed directly at her chest. Morgana sneered, her eyes flashing with contempt. "Oh, really? And what mistake is that, you pathetic little housemaid? You think you can stop a bullet with your cleaning rag?" "You assumed I was only looking for the mole," Sonita shouted back, her voice carrying a terrifying coldness that cut through the storm. She slowly raised her right hand from the pocket of her wet jacket. In her fingers, she held a small, rectangular black plastic device with a single, bright red button in the center. "I already knew you were the traitor 3 weeks ago, Morgana," Sonita revealed, a dark smile spreading across her lips. "I watched you download the banking files on the security cameras. I'll let you swap the folders tonight, because I wanted you to bring that specific file out onto this roof." Morgana's triumphant expression suddenly froze. She looked down at the thick manila folder in her arms, her eyes widening in sudden, absolute horror as she noticed a faint, rhythmic blue light blinking through the bottom edge of the cardboard backing. "That folder doesn't contain the Maroney banking codes," Sonita explained, her finger resting directly over the red button. "And it doesn't contain a federal tracking device either. I personally helped Mr. Vane package that folder this afternoon. Inside the split backing isn't a transmitter. It's 4 ounces of military-grade C4 plastic explosive." Morgana's face turned completely white. She instinctively screamed and tried to throw the folder away from her body into the wind. But she was a fraction of a second too late. Sonita's thumb pressed down firmly on the red button. Boom! A brilliant, blinding flash of hot orange and yellow light exploded into the rainy night sky, completely illuminating the roof of the Obsidian Tower for several miles. The shockwave of the blast was incredibly compact but powerful. It didn't tear Morgana apart because the C4 had been directed to blow outward away from her body, but the force of the explosion ripped the manila folder into 10,000 tiny pieces. A cloud of thick black ash and burning bits of paper flew into the wind, instantly destroyed by the heavy rain. The blast wave slammed into the side of the helicopter, completely shattering the tail rotor assembly. The metal blades twisted violently with a loud screech, and the tail of the helicopter swung around sharply, smashing into the concrete deck with a shower of bright sparks. The pilot inside quickly shut down the main engines as smoke began to pour from the broken machinery. The 3 mercenary guards were knocked off their feet by the pressure wave, their automatic rifles skidding across the wet roof. Before they could even try to reach for their weapons, Rodric moved forward like a shadow, firing 3 precise shots from his silver .45. The bullets didn't kill. They shattered the kneecaps of all 3 men, sending them screaming onto the wet concrete in agony. Morgana was thrown backward several feet by the blast, landing hard against the thick safety netting that lined the edge of the helipad. She lay there, her face covered in dark soot, her clothes smoking slightly from the heat, weeping violently as she realized her $50 million escape had just turned into dust. 10 minutes later, the storm finally began to lose its strength. The heavy downpour slowed to a gentle, cold drizzle, and the thick gray clouds parted slightly, allowing the pale white light of the midnight moon to shine down on the ruined roof. Lorenzo and Marcello had arrived on the roof with 10 of their own heavily armed bodyguards. The 3 mercenary guards were quickly disarmed, bound tightly with plastic zip ties, and dragged down the stairs to the basement holding cells. Morgana sat slumped against the concrete wall, her hands securely handcuffed behind her back. All of her corporate power and confidence were completely gone. She looked small, broken, and terrified as she stared down at the wet concrete floor, refusing to look up at the men standing around her. Rodric walked over to her slowly, his heavy leather shoes stepping through the puddles of rainwater. He stopped just 2 feet away from her, looking down with an expression that was entirely blank. There was no anger in his face, no sadness, and no regret. There was only the cold finality of a judge delivering a sentence. He reached up with his left hand, checking his neck. Despite the intense physical chase through the dark stairwell, the heavy wind, and the explosion, his shirt button was still firmly fastened, and the heavy silk knot of his black tie was still perfectly straight and centered, exactly as Sonita had fixed it 15 minutes ago. "You were incredibly smart, Morgana," Rodric said, his voice quiet, low, and terrifyingly calm. "You were the best financial mind this city had seen in 20 years. But you forgot the single most important rule of the Vane family. Family is everything. The moment you looked at my chair and thought you could take it for yourself, you stopped being family." He turned his back on her, looking toward Marcello. "Take her downstairs to the secure room. Let the elder question her about her contacts with the Moroni family. I want to know every single meeting she had, every phone call she made, and every dollar she promised them. When the elder is finished with his questions, ensure she disappears completely from the city." Marcello nodded grimly, his face hard. He stepped forward, grabbing Morgana roughly by the arm and dragging her to her feet. "With pleasure, boss. She won't see the sunrise." Morgana didn't scream or fight. She simply let herself be dragged away down the concrete stairs, her heels dragging uselessly against the ground until the heavy steel door clicked shut behind her, leaving the roof quiet once again. Rodric walked over to the edge of the roof, leaning his hands flat against the cold concrete ledge. He looked out over the vast, sparkling lights of the city below. The streets looked tiny from this height, like lines of glowing gold and silver thread running through the dark. Sonita walked up beside him. She had used a clean towel to wipe the rainwater from her face, and her dark hair was tied back into a simple, practical knot. She didn't look like a maid anymore, and she didn't look like a government agent either. She looked like someone who belonged exactly where she was standing, at the very top of the world. "You handled that situation perfectly," Rodric said, not turning his head to look at her, but his voice carried a deep sense of genuine respect. "Your original contract with me was only for counter-espionage. It didn't include chasing traitors up stairwells or blowing up helicopters in a rainstorm." "The job description changes when the lights go out, Mr. Vane," Sonita replied smoothly, a faint, confident smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She turned her body slightly to look at him. "Besides, your silk tie was still perfectly straight. I couldn't let those sloppy mercenaries ruin my handiwork before your big meeting." Rodric let out a low, genuine laugh, the first real sound of amusement he had made in months. He turned away from the city lights, facing her completely, and extended his right hand toward her. Morgana's *** position as chief of operations is vacant," Rodric said, his dark eyes fixing onto hers with absolute seriousness. "The salary is tripled from what I was paying her. You will have your own private office on this floor, your own security detail, and you will never have to carry a silver coffee tray again for the rest of your life. Unless, of course, you want to." Sonita looked down at his extended hand. Her grip was firm, strong, and incredibly steady as she shook his hand, cementing their new alliance. "I accept the position, Mr. Vane," Sonita said clearly. "But I have one very specific condition before I sign the paperwork tomorrow morning." Rodric narrowed his eyes slightly, amused. "Name it." "Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, we are changing every single biometric lock in this entire tower," Sonita said, her voice full of absolute authority. "We are wiping the security codes, changing the safe combinations, and rewriting the firewall protocols. And I keep the primary keys." Rodric's smile widened, a cold flash of pride in his eyes. "Deal." Together, the mob boss and his new chief of operations turned away from the edge of the roof and walked back through the heavy steel door, stepping into the red light of the tower, completely ready to run the city together in the dark.